Today, we're talking about product. And if you know anything about my firm, you know that I work with coffee roasters. And so the assumption oftentimes when we start talking about product is we're talking about coffee. Now, that is one part of product, and it is important to have product strategy around your coffee. But what we're talking about today is product as an investment. Years ago, when I started doing operations, I had an owner come into the lab one day, and I just had sat down, opened up my computer, and was getting to work. And the owner came in and he was like, "Hey, I have an idea. I heard this roaster that we've all heard of. One of the ways that they grew was they started selling, I think he called them ancillary products that weren't necessarily coffee at good margin, but also you can buy larger volumes of these products because they're not going to go bad. They have really long shelf lives, say 12 to 18 months. So we have a long runway to be able to sell them before they start to go bad, which means we have a long time to sell these products. And if we buy them in larger volumes, it brings our price down. So maybe there's something here. That was sort of the conversation that we had with this owner. And I didn't want to do it because my instinct was, we're a coffee company. We sell coffee here. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was like, it's good for the account, it's good for us, and it's going to make it more difficult for them to leave us in the future. Maybe it makes sense to try this. So that's exactly what we did. So I left that meeting having enough napkin math completed to determine that I think this will work. Then I went into the actual hard work of, okay, practically, what is an item, a product that we could utilize to test this? So what I did was I chose oat milk. And the reason was we had a cafe and we went through about a pallet of oat milk in 45 to 60 days. And so my thought was, okay, I'm going to order 6 months worth of oat milk. And in the meantime, I'm going to go have some conversations with these individuals that I know have this particular type of oat milk in their cafe and they're buying it somewhere. I'm going to go see if they would be interested in buying it from us instead of someone else, because another point that is helpful to your accounts is that if you consolidate their vendor list, it now makes it easier for them to buy it from you, even if it's a little bit more expensive or the exact same price, because now they've reduced the amount of invoices they've got to go through at the end of the month. So that's a benefit to the account on top of becoming more than just a coffee vendor. So I said, okay, I'm gonna see if I can find 10 people. I was able to find enough accounts that were interested in buying oat milk from us to the tune of, we went through our 6-month stock of oat milk in about 2 months. So just to put some practical numbers, let's say a pallet is going to be $3,000. If you're able to make 10% margin on that, that is $300. Meaning we're just saying net. The reason I'm using these sort of round numbers is just to make it easy on ourselves to conceptualize this. So if we say $3,000 for a pallet of oat milk, if I can net 10% on this, we're already going to all of these accounts already. So we're not adding new gas or delivery cost on our end. And if the account's already paying for delivery, which is another thing we can talk about in a future video, but let's imagine that we're already going to all these locations anyway. We spent $3,000, so we're essentially adding $300 in net profit just immediately on a $3,000 purchase. Now, there are some considerations we need to make. Yes, you have some stocking cost associated with that, of course. And yes, it is going to increase the weight of your deliveries, which will decrease your fuel economy. But all things being equal, you're already going to these accounts anyway. As we mentioned earlier, that's what we want. We want to increase the ticket price, the average tickets or average invoices. This is without having to add a new account necessarily. These are existing accounts. Now, the assumption here, there's a couple of assumptions we're making. We're making an assumption that you're in a market where you do deliveries. That's one. We're making an assumption that you already have existing wholesale accounts that go through a decent amount of volume of these ancillary products, these cups, lids, those types of things. Those are some of the assumptions that we're making. This won't work for everybody, but this could work for quite a few folks. Now, there's some considerations we need to make. Number one, do you have the cash to do this? Because yes, all the numbers make sense, right? We can do napkin math and it can all line up. But if we don't actually have the cash to spend $3,000 on a pallet of oat milk, then it could be really tricky to do this. And it might not make sense at that point. The other consideration to make is, do I have enough storage? Meaning, if we're going to buy 10 pallets of oat milk and 3 pallets of cups and 2 pallets of lids and a pallet of straws, this is starting to take up a lot more space. So that's the other thing to consider is, do I have the space to be able to implement this thoughtfully, or am I going to just be crawling over myself and actually reduce my efficiencies because of how much product is in my space now? So that's the other consideration to make is, do we have the space to do this? Now, if you don't have a ton of space, there's some sort of workarounds or some products you can offer that aren't going to take up a ton of space. And those products are tea is a really good one. Tea has a pretty small shelf footprint, depending on obviously how much you get and where you get it from. But generally speaking, you can get a fair amount of tea on a pretty small shelf. And tea has a pretty long shelf life. The other one that's really nice is your cleaning supplies. The portafilter cleaners or the milk steaming cleaning solutions, things like that, don't take up a ton of space and they're shelf stable, and so you can keep them for a long time. Another one would be filters. Now, what gets tricky is when you have an account that has, well, I have this size filter and I have that size filter. And this is where, once you get to a certain scale, it starts to make sense to advise your accounts on what sizes to get, so that if they have a larger brewer, okay, here's the 3 sizes that make sense for us when we sell folks equipment or when we're selling them these dry products. And just to be thoughtful about that, just so you don't have a bunch of different sizes that you're trying to stock, you can have 2 to 3 different sized filters for batch brewers, so that it makes it easier when you're stocking. And then also from a cash flow perspective, you don't have cash tied up in a dozen different sized filters from different companies. You have 3 or 4 filters that you stock and keep those locked in. So those are some of the things to think about. Do I have space for this? Do I have cash for this? Lastly, I would recommend, before you do anything, is I would go have a conversation with your accounts. Hey, we're thinking on adding oat milk, and this is roughly the pricing that we're looking at. Curious if this is close to what you're paying, and if not, how far off is it? Is there a way that you can then take that dollar amount and go back to your vendor and figure out, hey, if we buy an extra pallet or 2 more pallets of this oat milk or lids or whatever it is, what happens to our pricing? And so these are the types of conversations to be having, so that you can start to formulate an understanding of, okay, how do I make this work for my accounts? How do I make this work for our company? And what do I need to ask of my vendors in order to make this work for me as well? Those are really the things to be thinking about as we're thinking about product as an investment. In the next video, we're going to talk about product as an amenity. It's going to be good. As always, be well.